talk of the day and to be delivered by Dr. Priti Arun ma'am. And for this, I am pleased to invite our two esteemed chairperson, Professor P. Kulhara sir. Sir has been the past head of the department and one of the senior most teachers of psychiatry. He has tirelessly dedicated his time and expertise in the field of psychiatry. And sir's contribution has made a significant impact on the lives of various patients and their families. So I request sir to please come on the dais for chairing the session. Next, I would like to call our beloved Professor Ritu Dahra ma'am. Ma'am is a professor of clinical psychology and she is currently the senior most faculty in our department. So I would request the chairperson to introduce the speaker as well as the topic. Over to you, sir and ma'am.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Priti Arun, whom I've known for one of the better 20 years as a student, as a faculty, as a colleague, and now as a very modest, soft-spoken, but a highly learned and academic person who has great knowledge, both in psychiatry, but particularly in child psychiatry. And the subject she is going to speak on needs no introduction from me, but I'll leave that to Ritu.
Welcome you all to this today's CME on child abuse and child protection. Since morning people are talking about it, it's a very complex issue. As we all know that India is having about 19 to 20% of child population of the world's children population. And at the same time, India is a home for the largest sexual abuse also. NCRB has reported that about almost every second child is being abused, either sexually abused or by violence, and the people who are abusing are mostly relatives, neighbors, school teachers. And that has a lot of impact on the psychology of the child and how they internalize all these abuses. It has a long-term effect on them. We have seen that the Child Protection Act, POXPO, has come into force since 1912. But in spite of that, 70% of the families or children don't even report about this. It's only almost 3% people who report about it. And the conviction rate is still very low. People who are on bail outside are still higher than the people who are involved in it. And because of this, I think it's very important for, especially children when they have these problems, we are first encounter with the professionals of health, mental health care professionals. And it is important for us to understand why and what we can do. I think that's the topic which Preeti has chosen also, and today she will enlighten us about this and give us information that what we can do as professionals. Thank you. With this, I invite Dr. Priti Arun.
So good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I hope everybody had a nice cup of tea and everybody's awake. First of all, I would thank the Department of Psychiatry for giving me an opportunity to come here and talk about this important issue. I'm really thankful to Dr. Nidhi Chauhan and all the team for choosing this topic also and for inviting me. And so while I was preparing this topic, one thing that has been shared, and with Ritu also shared, that it's a very complex topic. And so this was something that was there in my mind, that how to communicate whatever is there. But then I was also very reassured that the next speaker for next 2 hours would be Dr. Shekhar Sheshadri. And I knew that there would be lots that will be best when he talks about it, because he has spent considerable time on this topic. And going back to the book, The Bitter Chocolates, that Dr. Basu referred about, I read it when it was recently published. And in that book, the author has given professional opinion of Dr. Seshadri in almost every chapter of her book. And that is a kind of book which sort of opened my eyes. It wasn't that I wasn't aware that that book is about sexual abuse, but here I'll not be limiting myself to only sexual abuse, but to all kinds of abuse. But that made me aware of the complexities involved, because one thing is that you know that this problem is there. Two, that what can be the complex situations arising out of this problem. So the topic given to me to talk about is that why and what should we know and what we can do. So I would like to ask everyone that we are talking about child abuse, but for any problem when we are going to discuss, we also have to keep the bigger picture in mind. That why are we talking about this problem? So for that, I would like to ask everyone that what kind of world do we want to live in? How should the world and its people be? Yeah. Yes, please.
Just yesterday, so I read this a little post up in the Telegraph where they said that in Japan, 5 to 6 year olds, if they're wearing a yellow cap, the society takes care of them as a pet. So that means that the children are the actual the future of the country, and which is why they just don't be their biological parents. It's the society of the home that needs to be protected and prevent any kind of turbulence that they should prevent. So I found that really amazing. I'm a mother of 4 years old, and here in India we're constantly scared. I'm scared somebody should be there all the time. You know that anonymous step out over in India. It takes a village to raise a child. We need that village, and so we do have the village, but is it safe in today's times? That's the big question.
Yes, absolutely. So the example of Japan that you shared talks about where everyone is involved and we feel that the children are safe there. I had also read a report about Japan in which the young children, they lock their home, they take their train passes, and then they change 3-4 trains and they go to their school. But we cannot even imagine that in India for many reasons. So the kind of society that we want to have is which is safe, where children are happy, and where everybody is mutually supporting each other. Right. So this quote from Nelson Mandela, that there can be no keener revelation of society's soul than the way it treats its children. So, which is very true. It is for society, but it is also true for a household, for a neighborhood, and for every place. So, coming to children, that they are individuals, they are neither the possessions of parents nor of the state, nor are they mere people in the making. They have equal status as members of the human family. Do we think like that for children? Because here I am talking about the child rights, not about the abuse, because abuse comes after, first comes the rights. So children start their life as totally dependent beings, and they rely on adults for the nurture and guidance, and which they need to grow towards independence. Such nurture is ideally found from adults in children's family. Ideally. So, but a healthy development of children is crucial for the future well-being of any society. So, if children are not healthy, our society will not be healthy. We have to keep that in mind. And if we want our society to be supportive, happy, cheerful place, then we have to give that to our children. So because they are still developing, children are especially vulnerable, more so than adults. to poor living conditions such as poverty, inadequate healthcare, nutrition, safe water, housing, and environmental pollution. The effects of disease, malnutrition, poverty, this threatens the future of children and therefore the future of societies in which they live. They are also vulnerable to neglect, because when these kind of situations are there, then neglect is very common and abuse in the form of physical, emotional, and sexual violence. Abuse is very common. So, research findings show that children's earliest experiences significantly influence their future development. This is about social research, but neurobiological also says the same thing. The course of their development determines their contribution or cost to society over the course of their lives. So how they contribute to society is dependent on their earliest of years. Children's brains are built moment by moment as they interact with the environment. In the first few years of life, more than 1 million neural connections are formed each second, a pace never repeated again. The quality of a child's early experiences makes a critical difference as their brains develop, providing either strong or weak foundations for learning, health, and behavior throughout life. So, with this background, I come to how do we define child maltreatment or child abuse. So, National Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children defines child maltreatment as harm experienced by a child by an adult or child that is physical, sexual, or emotional, but can also involve a lack of love, care, and attention. So, lack of love, care, and attention is equally a harmful thing. Child abuse and maltreatment constitute all forms of physical and or emotional ill treatment, sexual abuse, neglect or negligent treatment, or commercial or other exploitation resulting in actual or potential harm to the child's health, survival, development, or dignity. More comprehensive definition includes intended, unintended, and perceived maltreatment, whether habitual or not, of a child less than 18 years of age, including any of the following: psychological and physical abuse, neglect, cruelty, sexual and emotional maltreatment, any act, deed, or word which debases, degrades, or demeans the intrinsic worth and dignity of a child. So here the responsibility is too huge. Unreasonable deprivation of his or her basic needs for survival, such as food and shelter, or failure to give timely medical treatment to an injured child resulting in serious impairment of his or her growth and development or permanent incapacity or death. Now coming to the magnitude of the problem. So the WHO reports that worldwide child maltreatment is widespread, with 1 in 4 adults reporting being physically abused as children. India is home to over 19% of world's children, making it the country with the second largest child population in the world. Government of India survey showed that 53% of our children, which is a huge number, face some kind of abuse. In a study conducted in Kerala, 1/3 of the boys and girls both below 18 had faced some kind of sexual abuse during their childhood. 1/3 means out of 3, everyone is facing sexual abuse. Various researchers have shown clustering of adverse childhood experiences, with most children reporting 3 or more adverse childhood experiences. NCRB data of 2021 shows that the registered cases of crime against children across all states and UTs was 1.48 lakhs in 2021. This highest number of cases reported, it varies from year to year from different states, so I will not go into that. And these cases include abduction, child sexual abuse, murder, and child marriages. Crime rates increased by 16.2% from 2020 to 2021. Now these figures are considered highly underestimated because of underreporting by child, by parents, as well as healthcare providers and police. People do not report it. because of stigma, lack of awareness, and limited surveillance, and also because perpetrators are often family members. So when we look at what is the situation all over the world, this world map shows the rights of the child as measured by UNICEF and World Bank, in which India is in the difficult situation. Now, talking about some myths about child abuse. One myth is that children make up stories about abuse. Fact is, a child rarely lies about abuse. A child may change what they have said if they have been pressured or threatened to deny what's happened, or they are afraid of being removed from their family after they have told someone about it. Another myth is that sometimes children are to blame for their abuse. A child is never to blame for abuse. Adults are responsible for their own behavior, and no matter how a child behaves, adults have no right to harm a child. Myths: children aren't affected by domestic violence if they don't see it happen. A child doesn't need to see domestic violence to know if it's happening and be affected by it. A child sees how violence affects the person close to them. But it is also a fact that most of the domestic violence in Indian homes happens in front of the children. And at this, I'm reminded of about a family whom I know, not because they were my patients, but through a friend, a well-to-do, high socioeconomic status family, in which the father was would repeatedly indulge in domestic violence in front of children, because they were living in joint family. So it was this one room that this husband, wife, and 2 children were sharing. And what troubled me most was that at one point in time, this man had stripped his wife in front of his children and beaten her. Now, how would these children grow up to be normal and natural? I mean, I just fail to understand. With this, the second myth is also related, that child abuse only happens in poor families. It's not so. The case I am telling about was a high socioeconomic status family. So this can happen in any family regardless of their wealth or education. It's again not about education. People who harm children can come from any background, culture, or religion. Or they may be having any kind of job. It is not any one particular thing that we can label or categorize. Then the myth that only young children are abused. It can also happen to babies, to children, and to teenagers. It may seem that teenagers should be able to fight back, but it's hard to stand up to an adult who is causing the abuse, especially if it's a parent. Child abuse is often an abuse of power and trust. Cruel words or sexual or physical abuse hurts teenagers as much as it hurts a child. Then next myth is physical discipline is not child abuse. And this is very common in India, just slapping the child nicely and telling the doctor after that with a lot of confidence कि मैं तो एक लगा देती हूँ फिर सब ठीक हो जाता है. So children can be disciplined to behave in a more acceptable way. Physical discipline will become physical abuse if it causes harm or injury to a child. There are many ways to discipline children without using force. So with this we come to the risk factors for child abuse. Ecological models describing the risk factors for child abuse shows that the factors at individual level, relationships, community, and societal level. Individual factors relate to parent or caregiver. It's basically about having difficulty bonding with a newborn child as a result, for example, of a difficult pregnancy, birth complications, or disappointment with the baby, with the gender of the baby. Or it was maltreated as a child. It could be displaying a lack of awareness of child development or has unrealistic expectations that prevent understanding the child's needs and behaviors. For instance, interpreting the child's perceived misbehavior as intentional rather than as a stage in its development. So at this intentional thing, if we see most of the young mothers saying कि बच्चा बहुत तंग करता है, बच्चा तंग करना नहीं चाहता है, वो उसका बिहेवियर ऐसा है जिससे कि आप तंग हो रहे हो. It's not child's intention to trouble you. It's you who's perceiving this behavior as problematic. Child has something to, some kind of problem which he wants to communicate. It could be simply anger. But then, how are we perceiving that? That is what is interpretation of the parents. So how they are interpreting, that becomes important. Or response to perceived misbehavior with inappropriate, excessive or violent punishment or actions. So perceived misbehavior with inappropriate, excessive punishment can happen due to parents' own issues also. If they are not able to control their emotions, if they have say anxiety, depression, stress, hypomania, or any other kind of other stress issues, then again they are not able to regulate their emotions and they excessively respond to child. Or child suffers from physical, or parents suffer from physical mental health problems or cognitive impairment, like mother having borderline intellectual disability, and this interferes with the ability to parent. How do we say it? Basically that it shows lack of self-control when upset or angry. There may be substance misuse, is involved in criminal activity, socially isolated, exhibits poor parenting skills as a result of young age or lack of education or cultural beliefs, experiences financial difficulties which may sometimes be beyond their own hands, experiences violence or abuse in relationship, like mother getting violent behavior from husband and passing it on to the children. Individual factors related to the child: was an unwanted baby, has mental or physical disability or chronic illness. Disabilities make children really vulnerable to abuse of all kinds. Has temperament traits that are perceived by the parents as problematic, such as hyperactivity or impulsivity or excessive crying. Has multiple siblings or siblings of close age who demand parental attention. Then relationship factors: lack of parent-child attachment and failure to bond. Physical development or mental health problems of a family member, not necessarily of the parent or the child. Domestic violence, parental separation or divorce. Being isolated in the community, lack of support network, discrimination against the family because of ethnicity, nationality, religion, gender, age, sexual orientation, disability or lifestyle. Involvement of parent in criminal or violent activities. Then coming to community factors, tolerance of violence, that do people accept if husband and wife are fighting amongst themselves and throwing stones at each other. Gender and social inequality in community, lack of or inadequate housing, lack of services to support families and institutions and to meet specialized needs, high levels of unemployment, poverty, urbanization like urban slums, harmful levels of lead or toxins in the environment, transient neighborhood, again like urban slums, the easy availability of alcohol, inadequate policies and programs within institutions that make the occurrence of child maltreatment more likely. So now coming to societal factors, social, economic and health education policies that lead to poor living standards or to socio-economic inequality or instability. Social and cultural norms that demand rigid gender roles for males and females. Social and cultural norms that diminish the status of the child in parent-child relationship. The existence of child pornography, child prostitution and child labor, homelessness, and children in institutional care. So basically the interrelationship, basically the potential pathways explaining child maltreatment are from macro system level, which are societal context, including gender inequality and poverty. At exosystem level, community context. At microsystem level, it's the family, including adverse childhood experiences. At individual level, it is child maltreatment, and all these interact with each other to lead to child abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and emotional neglect. Now with this we come to protective factors. So protective factors are the elements which should be encouraged, especially in communities with low existing levels of social cohesion. Protective factors are secure attachment to the infant, to the adult family member, high levels of paternal care during childhood, good parenting, strong attachment between parents and children, and positive non-physical disciplinary techniques are likely to be protective factors. So this needs to be taught to most of the Indian parents. Lack of associating with delinquent or substance abusing peers, a warm and supportive relationship with a non-offending parent, a lack of abuse-related stress, living in communities with strong social cohesiveness, balanced nutrition, good healthcare, and consistent encouragement and supportive homes and school environments. So school and home environment both are important. So coming to assessment and management of a child abuse. So what are the types of child abuse? Physical abuse are deliberately causing injuries like bruises, burns, cuts, or broken bones. It can also include children being administered medication that they do not need or not being given essential medicines for illness. It includes kicking, shaking, slapping, spanking, throwing, poisoning, or drowning. All this is physical abuse. Sexual abuse, forcing or tricking a child into sexual activities. Contact abuse includes touching, kissing, oral sex. Non-contact abuse includes exposing or flashing, exposing a child to sexual acts, or making, viewing, or distributing child abuse images or videos. Emotional abuse, acts that humiliate a child by constantly criticizing, insulting, or shouting at them, blaming them, or manipulating a child. Also includes not allowing them to have friends or never saying anything kind or positive to a child. It perpetuates the feeling that child is not loved, is worthless, or inadequate. And also along with this, there would be parents who are always demanding their children to perform better or to score a certain percentage or get admission to a certain educational institute. Neglect, failure to meet a child's basic requirements. Physical neglect, when a child's basic needs such as food, clothing, shelter, and safety are not met. Emotional neglect is when a child is not provided with the nurture and stimulation they need to grow and thrive. Adverse childhood experiences could be direct, indirect, or indirect extended. In indirect, we have discussed all these, but basically where it is direct, like bullying is directed towards the child. Rest are not directed towards the child, but these are adverse childhood experiences. Indirect extended are at societal and community level. Now coming to signs and symptoms of child abuse. Of physical abuse, there are mostly skin lesions which are most common, unexplained bruises or marks at various stages of healing. It can reflect the shape of the object used, like buckle or something. It is often on face, torso, buttocks, back and thighs, the places which child himself or herself cannot access. There can be unexplained burns on palms, sole, buttocks and thighs. Unexplained fractures or dislocation, which is highly indicative, especially in children less than 1 year old. And other unexplained injuries like bite marks, pinch marks, loss of hair or bald patches, injuries to or more planes of the child's body. Behavioral signs in children are nightmares, sleep difficulties, school absenteeism, disciplinary problems, arriving early to school and reluctant to leave because school looks like a safe place to stay. apprehensions when other children cry or crying spills themselves, aggression and conduct issue. These children may also often have symptoms of internalizing disorders like depression and anxiety. Other telltale signs: babies who have not achieved the milestones of cruising or crawling and cannot have bruises or abrasions on their skin unless intentionally harmed. So if the child is always on the bed, he will not have any bruises. And identifiable shape, lack of visible physical injury does not exclude physical trauma, like shaking, drowning, and hence a vigilant history taking and examination is mandated. At times, many of my residents talk about some kind of abuse in childhood, and then they say history could not be corroborated. So if there are people to corroborate the information given by the child, then in most likelihood that incident would not happen. So if an adult is giving such a history, we must accept that. Now coming to emotional abuse. In babies, developmental delays, failure to thrive. In toddlers, apathetic behavior, fearfulness, violence, extreme temper tantrums, and sleep disturbances. In school-going age, most apparent in this stage are inappropriate wetting or soiling, non-attendance in school, speech disorders or stuttering, asthma, allergies or ulcers, frequent infections, which are all psychosomatic problems, irrational and persistent fears. In adolescence, self-harm, depression, oppositional and aggressive behavior, self-destructive behavior, poor self-esteem, eating disorders, habit disorder, poor peer relationships, lack of responsiveness, and chronic academic underachievement. Telltale signal: insecure, anxious, distrustful child, often makes superficial relationships, passive, overly concerned with pleasing adults, low self-esteem, appears threatened and withdrawn, difficulty in forming relationships with teachers and peers, and indulges in crime or substance use. Now coming to signs and symptoms of sexual abuse. In physical signs, difficulty walking or sitting, redness, rashes, bleeding in oral, genital or anal areas, bruises on breast, buttock, lower abdomen, thighs, genitals or rectal area, sexually transmitted diseases, pain or itching in genital or anal areas, difficulty in bladder or bowel control, pain and constipation. The behavioral signs are withdrawal, fantasy or infantile behavior, excessive awareness about sexual activity or unusual sexual behavior or knowledge, excessive masturbation in young children, poor peer relationship, delinquency or running away, unwillingness to participate in physical sports or gym, sleep disturbances and anxiety. Now coming to signs and symptoms of neglect. Physical indicators are poor nutritional status, malnutrition, inappropriate clothing for graduation, untreated illness or injury, lack of safe, warm and sanitary shelter, lack of necessary medical and dental care. Behavioral indicators are begs or steals food, chronic hunger, falls asleep in school, excessive absence or coming late, dull, apathetic appearance, runs away from home. So about this excessive falling asleep in school, this also happens when children are allowed to remain on mobile or TV for too long and they neglect their sleep. Even then it would happen. It's not necessarily the neglect in other sense, but it is neglecting their daily routine. Repeated acts of vandalism, reporting no caretaker at home, assumes adult responsibilities, poor social skills, language delay, depression, anxiety, phobias, and externalizing disorders like conduct disorder. Now with this, if we want to make a diagnosis of child abuse, then obviously a history of what has happened, physical examination, laboratory studies, radiological studies and documentation. Most important is high index of suspicion. So unless we know that something happens, we would not identify it. So we will only be able to identify something when we are aware of its occurrence, that this thing happens. So a health assessment should include consent from both child and caregiver, medical or health history from both, a top-to-toe physical examination including genital, anal area, a documentation and treatment of injuries, mental health assessment, screening or treatment for sexually transmitted diseases and HIV, and prevention of pregnancy where this is appropriate. Then management is reporting to authorities, which many times in hospital settings doctors are reluctant to do. Though with POXO it is their responsibility, they should be doing it. But easier is to not to talk about it. And there are many issues related to this which Dr. Sheshadri will be covering. Management of injuries and specialist consultation for both physical, psychological and behavioral issues, counseling and psychotherapy and psychosocial intervention. But important is to ensuring the safety first. Removal from home whenever warranted, protective hospitalization and placing under child protection services. It's also important to keep the child's interest first rather than the caregiver's interest. There are many legal provisions related to prevention of child abuse, and I will not go into details of any of these because there's one whole session related to this aspect. Now we come to how can we prevent child abuse. What we can do is that we should try and prevent it. First is to identify risk factors and early intervention. In this, I have talked about all the risk factors, but identifying at-risk families, maternal predictors, hostile environments, raising the awareness. Because even in many places, people do not want to acknowledge that anything like child abuse exists or it occurs. So raising the awareness is very important. And teaching safety rules to children. In teaching safety rules, there are many things. For young children, it's important to let them know that who are the people they can contact. First thing is to give them this assurance that they can talk to their parents about anything, any problem that they feel, anything which they do not like. So unless children have that kind of confidence in their caregivers and their parents, they will not be able to talk about anything that bothers them. So that is first important thing. And then if they are discussing anything, many times what happens is children do not talk that this thing has happened with them, or they may not give the whole picture. They may give just part of the picture, or they may talk about it as if it has happened to someone else. Basically to judge the reaction from the parent, that what kind of reaction will they get. And if they find that this is alright to talk, then they will go ahead and talk about it. Third important thing is to impart sex education to children. What is the age for sex education? When should it be started? Can someone answer? From the beginning. Yes. So basically when we start telling children about names of the body parts, the sex education starts from then. Then talking to them about good touch, bad touch, and if anything that they do not like and they do not feel comfortable with, they should come and talk to their parents about it. Now the safety rules are, this whole area of cyber things I didn't touch because I thought that can be a whole separate session. That again is very important these days to tell children, because on mobile, mostly children are on mobile. Those who did not have mobile, they all got their mobiles during pandemic to continue with their education. And mobile is there, internet is there, and now the social media, they have all entered into social media. And they are indulging into all kinds of activities, and they are accepting requests. They do not know what exactly is the implication of their behavior. Like yesterday, there was a report of a 9-year-old girl committing suicide because her parents asked her to study. And what she was known for was that she was used to make and post her videos online. So a 9-year-old posting videos online, when asked by parents to study, she went home and committed suicide. So this 9-year-old is not really aware of what other kind of problems she may get into. She was just happy getting a lot of attention and good comments from people online, and to her, parents asking to study was something just not acceptable. So in safety rules, other obvious common safety rules are asking the children to not to talk to any strangers, not to accept any gifts from any strangers. So all these are the basic safety rules. It is easy to teach all these safety rules to normally developing children, but to intellectually disabled children, it's difficult to teach them. Because many a times parents are so burdened with having a child with intellectual disability that to teach the child with intellectual disability about safety rules becomes absolutely secondary. They are busy with just informing them about the primary care things. Then safe transport to and from school. There are very specific guidelines by different child protection units about the safe transport to and from school, that there should be a female conductor and till the last child is dropped off from the bus, and the bus should not leave till one of the parents or caregivers comes to pick the child. All such rules are there on paper. Online safety I've already talked, and but one important thing, not to take pictures or videos without permission. Even in school, if someone is going to school and starts clicking pictures, that is not right. And then it's not that school staff will always be supportive. School staff may also, because we know that most of the abuse occurs from the known people. So even school staff should copy all emails to parents rather than writing just to the child. Then in safety in hostels, there should be monitoring committees, and there should be rules strictly in place. On paper, most of the things are there. But how effectively all these committees work, that differs from awareness of the committees and how seriously they are able to do their job. Now, what we can do to raise awareness and to stop hiding. So now this again coming to child sexual abuse, because that is the topic which is least talked about. And it is also least talked about because most people would want to close their eyes from this topic. I am saying this because in my institute only, when we talked about sexual abuse, some people said, no, it cannot happen, because they were not willing to accept that something like this can also happen. So if you are not aware that something happens, you will not be identifying it first of all, and then you will not be taking any action towards that. So raising awareness from at each level, from community, society, family, healthcare professionals, schools, child care institutes, residential facilities, hostels, in every place it is important to raise awareness. It is also important to raise awareness in housing societies, so that more people remain vigilant about such things happening. For this, one can hold events, one can hold talks, one can display helpline numbers. This helpline numbers can be displayed in schools, in all other institutes, and even in resident welfare associations. Wherever children are, helpline numbers should be there. Neighborhood watch teams should be formed. And in schools, parent-teacher meetings should be held regularly. Usually the parent-teacher meetings in schools are like giving the report of the child to the parent. But it should be conducted in the true manner in which we talk about the bigger issues related to the children as a group and school as a unit, rather than just one-on-one. Your child scored this much marks, it will be better. Or your child did very well, congratulations. So something more substantial needs to be done. Though it is a fact that most of the schools are not able to do that. Then schools, there should be child protection policy. Again, the child protection policy should be there in schools. It is written. It is there in the written guidelines. But how many schools have that, and how many schools display that child protection policy in the prominent places which everybody can read? That is yet to be seen. So with this, I come to the end of my presentation, that basically it takes a community to protect the child, and it's every child's right to develop and thrive and not just survive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Priti, for a very helpful, knowledgeable presentation. Would you please join us here so that if there are any questions, you can ask them. And I'll request you to conduct the session further. Any lights, please.
Maybe we can take 2 or 3 questions in about 5 minutes. No questions?
Yes.
Hi, Dr. Priti. This is Dr. Kanika Sharma. I'm not the medical doctor here. I teach at the university. So we actually do handle this subject from a legal point of view, and that's what I was trying to learn from you here. My question to you is it like you were talking about how the child, I definitely think smoking and drinking excessively in front of the child is very problematic. But is that the problem, or the behavior of what follows that? Is that the problem? So, I mean, the positive association or negative? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So basically, when a child sees a kind of behavior he sees at home, observes this behavior at home, then this behavior becomes the normal thing for him. And like in the inaugural session, what Professor Vivek Lal was sharing, that the parents smoking in front of their children is equally maltreatment or abuse, it can be called, because it is normalizing this behavior. So, and the behavior afterwards is also definitely a problem. But then, I mean, many a times men say that we drink a lot, but then we don't say anything to anyone. But the problem is not saying or not saying. The problem is that the way they are behaving, that they are not interacting with them, they are not taking other responsibilities, they are sort of within themselves, they just go off to sleep and do nothing. So that also is child neglect. So then they are not providing that emotional environment which they would have otherwise done. It's both of them.
My question is that, so with a lot of Indian families, I've seen, and I think it's a global phenomenon also, but usually in the family setting, the mother is expected to look after the child and the father is expected to provide for the child. And socially, if the father is not giving emotional attention to the child, it is socially considered acceptable, that it's okay, as long as he's providing money and security, he's a good father. But I've seen from my personal and professional experience that children need emotional attention from both parents. And okay, maybe the norm may be that the father is providing less attention, but there are some cases in my clients I've seen that the mother is not so emotional, but the father is very emotional. So my question is it important for both parents to be emotionally available for the child, or is it that if one parent is giving emotional attention and the other isn't, it's not neglect? So some clarity on that.
Ideally speaking, it is important for both parents to be providing for emotional needs of the child. So child needs father and mother both love, and because both provide for different aspects. But when we talk about emotional neglect, it is also when child's emotional needs are neglected. So if because one of the parents is too busy doing other chores, one parent is able to take care of the emotional needs, then technically we should not be saying it that it is emotional neglect.
I am Professor Gupta from Shubhri University. I would like to know all these, professionals who are aware of this problem. This is a great menace in the society, and which has been known since I think 4-5 decades, more so. And then, what kind of steps are being taken by the associations like, Indian Association of Clinical Psychologists, Indian Psychiatric Association, and Sociologists Associations or Psychiatric Social Workers Association, and what kind of initiative have been taken for this menace which is entering into each house as per se, as it is visualized or it is experienced or the data is coming about. So what kind of steps? Because that's important, because we have to rather make aware the policymakers that we are aware of this menace and we have to do something very seriously. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Let me just deal with this issue because it's a very systemic and an important question. The government of India has basically shifted from a scheme to the mission mode. So your women's helpline one-stop centers, which were running hitherto under a certain scheme, is now subsumed under Mission Shakti. Your ICDS, which is the world's biggest welfare program, early childhood education care, is now subsumed under Mission Poshan 2.0 and Saksham Anganwadi. And the Integrated Child Protection Scheme, the JJ system, the child welfare committees, childcare institutions are subsumed under Mission Vatsalya. The current initiative that I'm running now, which is a national initiative and an integrated resource on child protection and mental health across 29 states and 4 union territories in the country, is mentioned in the guidelines of Mission Vatsalya. If you look at the guidelines there, and Samvad, the program that I'm running, is basically the response of the state system to basically capacitate and vitalize the child protection systems all across the country. I will explain that, sir, as I go into the subject of, but since Priti has been engaged for many years in the associations that you alluded to, every association has task forces. Even the Indian Psychiatric Society has a task force on child mental health. The Indian Association of Child and Adolescent Mental Health even the Indian Association of Clinical Psychology has set up a particular task force to look specifically at issues of trauma and child abuse. So, the reason why we are gathered here today is to precisely recognize the critical point that you are raising there. Before the day is through, I will introduce you to the links of all this work so that you have them handy to understand and appreciate how extensively this work has spread. In fact, in February, we just completed a 2-day consultation with the National Judicial Academy with 2 sitting Supreme Court judges, a retired Supreme Court judge, and sitting High Court judges, including chairpersons of the Juvenile Justice Committee of High Courts from 18 High Courts of the country in the National Judicial Academy in Bhopal to look at the challenges as far as POCSO and its implementation is concerned on the one hand. And because Samvad works extensively in the education sector as well, the point that Preeti made about the preventive aspects is also something that is extensively covered in the kind of question that you have raised. So I just wanted to say that a lot of gains have been made, and I'll be happy to share the links as we go along. And use the word hush. And the director of PGI also spoke about the whole, in fact, even Preeti spoke about the whole silence around it. This, is, and friends, is called the culture of denial and the conspiracy of silence. The culture of denial and the conspiracy of silence. One of the ways that we've gone about doing, addressing this issue, and indeed let's recognize that the reason why we are meeting here today is to precisely address the kind of silence that you allude to. And our hope is that if each of you speaks about this to 10 people, God will bless you. That's a different issue. If you believe in God, that is. I don't, but that's a different matter. Let's not go into that debate right now. Because it goes back to the whole fragmentation that Vivek spoke about in his novel, कि कैसी दुनिया है यार ये, किस तरह की दुनिया में रह रहे हैं हम. So let's not go into that direction. Samvad has basically gone into the panchayat system. We have to get down to the lowest system of governance. And we have selected 114 of aspirational districts of the 700 odd districts in India to look at child protection as an agenda. तो इससे जुड़ी हुई जो मटेरियल है जो हमने तैयार किया है, that is available and now it is dispersed through the State Institute of Rural Development into the panchayats to precisely address the kind of community awareness and sensitization that you speak about. Both the videos which are done in 3D animation, incidentally we didn't know how expensive 3D animation would be. It's extraordinarily expensive. But they are both available on our YouTube channel, that is Samvad, SAMVD, Samvad Enhanced, and they are released across panchayats to, address elected representatives of the panchayat, the community, the CDPO, and the parents that they work with, so that community level stuff about child protection as a whole is kind of raised. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shikhar, for enlightening us. I think we are running not out of time, we are overrunning time. So, thank you all for your participation and intelligence, and go back to the